Hello, everyone, and welcome to CAHI's first Meet the Artist event of the 2021 academic year. CAHI has expanded our partnership this year with IU's Arts and Humanities Council, including in the organization of this and other Meet the Artist, Meet the Author events. So we join with the council in extending our greetings both to our speakers today, Sarah Edmands Martin, and to you, our audience. It's my true pleasure to introduce our speaker to you today. Sarah Edmands Martin is Assistant Professor of Graphic Design at the Eskenazi School of Art, Architecture, and Design. She holds degrees in English Literature and Painting from the University of Maryland and an MFA in Visual Communication Design from Notre Dame. The fact that she draws on both aspects of her training is evident in her self-description as a designer, storyteller, and researcher. In fact, Professor Martin was named a 2020 Communication Design Research Think Tank Fellow by Design Incubation, allowing her to further integrate her work as practitioner and scholar. Professor Martin's design work is wide-ranging, creative, probing, political, scientific. She has received many accolades, including this year alone, a Paris Design Award, the London International Creative Competition Award, and several from Graphis. Her publications engage with a wide range of topics, including graphic novels, motion design, ethics in design, and the efficacy of political poster design, among others. So a warm welcome now to Professor Martin, who will discuss her research and creative activity, including her most recent project, Ongoing Matter, Democracy, Design, and the Mueller Report, co-created with Professor Ann H. Berry of Cleveland State University. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I am going to share my screen and get started. Thank you so much, Debbie. I have a couple quick thank yous. Obviously, CAHI, Ed Commentali, the Arts and Humanities Council, and all of the wonderful staff and students who have helped to promote and steward this work. I'm deeply humbled to speak to you all today about my creative practice and my research. I'm going to begin with a context of where I come from as a designer and an artist, and then lead you into some current projects. I'm a graphic designer, an animator, and a storyteller, as Debbie mentioned, and I focus on the unsettling aspects of our shared human experiences. I use design as a tool for intervention and deviation, with a creative practice that explores the broad genre of fairy tales as a space of intentional perversity. The perverse holds a thrall over my work, rooted in the Latin verb pervertere, meaning to turn away or to subvert. I create experiences that embrace this turn, proposing worlds that exist just outside the authority of the normal. Researching Western origins of fairy tales led me to the Scandinavian idea that the familiar is tied to the house, the domestic, the expected. Within a fairy tale, there is then the unheimlich, the not at home, or the unfamiliar, untame, or uncomfortable. With fairy tales, society has the opportunity to view itself from outside of the house, outside of itself. And while this space may be uncomfortable, it is also rife with possibility and change. So the first piece that I'll share this afternoon is an original short animated dark fairy tale, which you saw a preview of just now. It's about greed, ambition, and the perils of forgetting one's history. It's called Wishes and Fractured Vision. And the piece has been recently curated into the Northern Illinois University Art Museum in an exhibit entitled Story References, which opens January 2021. And then I included this install shot from the Zuckerman Museum of Art in Georgia, just to show you the kind of digital interfacing of how this animated work can be exhibited. The piece seeks to reclaim the weird and the wondrous of perverse fairy tales without princesses or happily ever afters, in order to eschew the formula of Disney fairy tales and return to that darkness just outside the house. The work navigates these difficult themes within the magic and whimsy of the genre, helping a viewer accept that both bad and wondrous things happen or can happen to everyone. Elevating the strange and the eerie and the magical is important because these kinds of tales enact an important social function. They explain and explore the horrific and the unknown from a safe distance. Magic. The medium of fairy tale offers a rhetorical kind of space, outside our normal expectations, as an axiom where assumptions can be manipulated, ultimately prompting us to ask a different set of questions. I'm interested in dispelling the happily ever after privilege and complacency that can occur in viewers and readers who consume too many derivative regurgitations of a certain kind of narrative. This work seeks to reclaim the wondrous and the inexplicable that becomes lost in cookie cutter stories that are designed to sell and resell. The work is an homage to the brothers Grimm, Hans Christian Andersen, and early animators, particularly Lotte Redinger, an overlooked female artist who pioneered silhouette animation in the early 20th century, as well as contemporary artists like Kara Walker, for example, whose paper silhouettes challenge normative historical narratives. My process for creating these works is archival, analytic, and artistic. After examining archival folklore or stories or narrative, I analyze recurring motifs and ideas within the records of historical documents, and then artistically respond to this data. You'll see this reflected later as well. Using my extensive experience as a graphic designer, I then develop new illustrations, animations, and typesetting. And so this takes us to the second project that I want to share with you tonight, which is a site-specific stop-motion animation that I created for the Wylie House Museum. It's currently up and on exhibit, although via the virtual tour. And this piece responds to the archival materials within the Wylie House of marginalized voices specific to Indiana. And for those of you that heard my talk about this actually last night, you may see a few familiar images. The piece is a cut paper stop motion animation. It's projected into the women's workroom, which is room 202 of the museum. And it focuses on the forgotten words and artistry of one of the women of the home, Maggie Wylie Millette. The piece is in direct dialogue with the recorded shadows in the permanent collection of family silhouettes that you can see here on the mantle. So these silhouettes are from the 1900s and are permanently collected in the museum. And so the direct dialogue between moving shadows created today and the recorded shadows of the past is of particular interest to me. Within the action of the stop motion, there is a rumination on feminist artistry, legacy, and sacrifice. Maggie, although she had dreams of studying art and was untrained but proficient painter and draftswoman, she was not able to study in New York or Philadelphia, and lamented the fact in her own personal letters and journals, which I researched. So the piece focuses on the following motifs. There's 3 motifs that I drew on here. One is the shadow. A shadow is necessary in order to create silhouettes, historic silhouettes that you can see in the women's workroom, which I just showed. The absence of light, the opposite of self, is traced with a device called a physionotrace. And I was interested in the physionotrace's process as it produces multiple shadow copies simultaneously. It's an early photographic method, an early method of reproducing imagery using light in a very kind of literal translation of photo and graph. The Latin there is drawing with light, right? So I wish to highlight that as 21st century visitors, we will never actually see the woman who Maggie was, the person that I based this piece off of. We won't ever see her. Only at a distance and without full clarity of detail will we get her likeness. And similar to the reduced, flattened black void of silhouette portraits, I kind of stick within this, this space. I also highlight the vulnerability of the medium of Black paper silhouettes, linking the loose outlines of fragile paper to the vulnerable identity of women in the 18th century. The second motif that is called upon in this piece in particular is authorship. The silhouette animation of this woman relies on the portraits that we do have as reference. So by animating that silhouette, I give Maggie an authority to create, showcasing her artistry in a way mostly forgotten by history or impeded by historical context. The piece also calls into question the institutional narratives that shape whose deeds get recorded in the course of history. In this way, the quote unquote truth is consecrated in traditional history painting, draftsmanship, and literature. All of that is called into question. And here again, I use my creative practice as a tool for intervention and deviation. The third and final motif of the piece is the texts. The words. I draw upon her direct words from archival letters and other documents in order to juxtapose what is text and what is image. Projecting the typographic information physically onto the room emphasizes the difference between what the record states and what might have been. Through careful play of language and letter form, this component seeks to lead viewers to a critical understanding of the past, while also proposing an examination of contemporary gender stereotypes. And so here's some installation shots of the animation projected onto the wall, and then again, very dimly in conversation, you can see the permanent exhibition there. Ultimately, this piece highlights what we might know of a historic woman, of her artistic dreams, and what might have been lost due to historical context. And the perversity here, as I see it, is the refutation of the romantic promise that conventional female roles, marriage, and motherhood held in the 19th century, particularly for women. I also thought it might be interesting to show you a little bit of my process, because these are animated by hand with cut paper. And I layer pieces of glass or sometimes acrylic. In this case, it was a hard acrylic. I layer pieces of acrylic and compose my shots, and then frame by frame animate. So this is the pre-cropped process shot of some of the animation that you've already seen. Perversity is also the language of protest, a lens through which to propose deviation from that which is understood to be orthodox or quote unquote normal. So as a designer who focuses on the scarier aspects of our shared experiences, the past 4 years reminded me that what is dark and frightening may not be safely relegated to bedtime stories or children's rhymes. Sometimes the scary is more literal than figurative, with misinformation and foreign interference with democracy, for example, being in and of itself a kind of dark timeline. And no doubt, many people have found the last 4 years particularly frightening or perverse. The final project I want to share with you tonight is called Ongoing Matter, Democracy, Design, and the Mueller Report. It's a nonpartisan grassroots design initiative co-created by myself and Ann Berry of Cleveland State that seeks to foster audience engagement with the Mueller Report. It's a multi-platform exhibition of contemporary design artifacts, including posters, interactive design, web, projection, and augmented reality, bringing the words of the report to life visually and making the text more approachable, providing entry points for learning more about the document itself. Ongoing Matter also calls the average citizen to respond to what has become one of the most consequential political moments in modern history, a moment when the integrity of American elections and democracy itself is at risk, by actually reading Special Counsel Robert Mueller's words. Before diving into the work itself, I'm going to provide a brief introduction to the Mueller Report as important context for the project. So the report documents the findings and conclusions of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into 3 main things. 1, the Russian efforts to interfere in the 2016 US presidential election. 2, allegations of conspiracy and coordination between the Trump campaign, the presidential campaign, and Russia. And 3, allegations of obstruction of justice. It covers a great deal of territory. This is a piece published by the Washington Post that printed all 448 pages of the report. And as you can see, it was quite long and dense. And it includes discussion of the misinformation and disinformation campaigns that Russians executed posing as Americans via social media platforms. And the report itself has resulted in indictments and prison sentences. These are 3 pages that I pulled from the report. In its current form, the report is opaque. Not only is its verbiage difficult for an average citizen to parse due to its vernacular, the kind of legalese in which it's written, it's also poorly designed. Important information is squirreled away in annotation, and entire pages are blacked out due to redacted content. So I think you can kind of get a sense, although it is graphic in terms of the contrast of form and typography, it is not legible. According to the Special Counsel for the United States Department of Justice, these effaced pages would cause, quote, harm to ongoing matter, end quote. So it's only appropriate then that this project be called Ongoing Matter in direct reference to this obfuscation, its lasting impact, and a goal of illuminating the literally impenetrable. In doing an audit of the document, I found of the 448 pages and the 200,000 words, there's something like over 1,000 footnotes that are quite large, and over 11% of the report is redacted. Some of these sections have since been, in the Roger Stone report, have since been unredacted, but this number stays pretty close to the graphic that I created here. I saw this as a design problem. There is a need to clarify what is documented in the Mueller report and respond to what is continuing to come to light in the aftermath of the US 2016 election. The Mueller report lays this foundation. However, despite its magnitude, its importance, and the dissemination in general of its content via books, news reporting, podcasts, and as you can see, the public is interested in it. It's been downloaded over 800 million times in 2019, so that was a year ago. Despite the public's interest in it, the length and overall layout and design of the report is a barrier for digesting information. And at its core, that is a failure of design. And as a result of that failure, the average American citizen may not be aware of the gravity, the significance, or the substance of the information contained within. As the 2020 presidential election approaches, it is more important than ever that the average American understands what occurred in the last election cycle. And so as you can see, only a quarter of Americans claim to have read any of the document, with only 3% having read the whole thing. Disinformation and misinformation spread through social media have also served as barriers preventing the public from engaging with this report. And it makes it seem really difficult, if not impossible, to discern for the average citizen fact from fiction. So the Ongoing Matter project was designed as an intervention. It follows in a long history of posters as a medium for empowering citizens at crucial societal, political, and cultural moments in time. The charge of the work is that of empowerment, then, using the art of communication, design, graphic design, to one, reveal, inform, and spur an audience and a viewer to act, and two, to combat widespread misinformation and disinformation. So although the poster designs, and these are the first two, I'll take you through quite a number, although they are interpretive, they illuminate the major threats of democracy or to democracy cited in the Mueller report by citing text of the Mueller report verbatim. So every piece of type that is used in the design is actually pulled from the report. And part of this design was, again, with the goal of providing context to the report. Each poster has a citation designed into the graphic. You can see in this pair, there's one at the bottom right and one at the bottom left, citing the volume, the page number, a summary of the text that's written into the poster design, so that a viewer could go back and dig into the report using this as kind of the open door or a starting point. So for example, in these two pieces, I reference volume 1, page 31, so page 31 of volume 1, which outlines the fake propaganda posters that Russian operatives designed in 2016 for the Trump campaign. One of which was this Minors for Trump poster. I'll just read that little snippet there. From June 2016 until the end of the presidential campaign, almost all of the US rallies organized by the IRA, which is the Russian operative group, focused on the US election, often promoting Trump and opposing the Clinton campaign. And so one of these rallies that they actually promoted with propaganda posters, but also helped organize through social media campaigning, was this Minors for Trump rally in Pennsylvania. And so I'm referencing, with my design, I'm referencing the Russian propaganda poster, but also a long history of design as it holds a mirror up to history. So for the poster on the left, I am referencing the Russian Russian constructivist propaganda poster designs by artists like Rodchenko. But I'm also referencing the UX/UI design of Facebook's interface, because Facebook was also such a integral component of spreading misinformation and disinformation. And I'm citing here the actual text and the actual username and Facebook ID of these Russian operatives, of their posts, and what they would say in their posts on Facebook. So there's a little bit of a collapse of history and a leveraging of principles of graphic design in order to call attention to the findings of the report. These are not part of the campaign, but I want to just reference political poster design history here for a second, if you'll allow me. So design director and founder of Thirst, Rick Valicenti, writes in Graphies, throughout time, quote, "Throughout time, posters stand as enduring reflections of the moment in which they were designed," end quote. Despite predictions that printed materials would perish in the digital age, the printed political poster has not disappeared. Elizabeth Resnick, curator of such comprehensive poster exhibits such as Art of the Poster, The Graphic Imperative, Graphic Advocacy, states that, quote, "The poster in all its forms has persisted as a vehicle for the public dissemination of ideas, information, and opinions," end quote. She actually wrote us a really lovely letter of recommendation for this project in order for us to help secure funding. And so I wanted to take a second and thank you, Elizabeth Resnick, for that endorsement. So the two posters that I want to briefly kind of show in relationship to this project here are probably one that you're very familiar with, and probably another that you're maybe not as familiar with. Back in 1972, Andy Warhol was commissioned to create a poster for the Democratic presidential candidate, George McGovern. What Warhol actually made didn't depict McGovern at all, as you can see. Instead, the, quote, "Vote McGovern" poster showed the sickly, snake green-skinned, diabolically orange-eyed incumbent candidate Richard Nixon. Just like in Warhol's Marilyn Monroe or Mao silkscreens, Warhol is sourcing popular media-approved portraits of Nixon to use as his base. Warhol's colors and alterations, however, completely transform a visage that we are used to seeing, or that 1970s viewers were used to seeing, into something disturbing, commenting on Nixon's unsavory character at this point in history during his re-election campaign. Visually confronted by the prospect of the alternative, one could be compelled to do what the poster insisted instead and actually vote McGovern. And then on the right is Shepard Fairey from 2008, a very well-known poster design at this point for Barack Obama's 2008 presidential election campaign. And Shepard Fairey has a long history actually in street art and graffiti. And so the reason I tie these two together is that I see this project as in a long conversation of taking images from approved media sources and reshaping them in order to call attention to the conversation that is happening right now in a contemporary moment. So these two posters are part of Ongoing Matter. I designed the one on the left in response to part of the report which documents advertisements, again, political propaganda that the Russian IRA, the Russian operatives, created. They created Instagram accounts, for example, asking US persons to help them, quote, make a patriotic team of young Trump supporters by uploading photos with the hashtag Kids for Trump. And again, because this is Russian interference, the conversation is not one way, right? It has this devious kind of undertone to it. I'll just read the final bit of the report for you to give it context. In subsequent months, the IRA purchased dozens of advertisements supporting the Trump campaign, predominantly through Facebook groups, such as quote unquote, Being Patriotic was the name of one of the groups, Stop All Invaders, and Secure Borders. And then on the right, this poster design references a Meet the Press interview, again, documented verbatim from the report, in which Trump says, quote, I think it would be a positive thing if Russia and the United States actually got along, end quote. And then in a second interview in South Carolina, he says, quote, you want to make a good deal for the country, you want to deal with Russia. And so this design is kind of expanding that idea in a visually graphic way to talk about what it means to have a campaign, a presidential campaign that has such strong ties to Russia. And so I was referencing flat French, the design of flat French paper puppets that you could cut out and piece together and pull with a string. This pair of posters that I designed both reference page 183 of the report, which describes how the investigation, so this is page 183, by the way, of volume 2. So after 300 some odd pages deep into the report, the investigation could not, given all of the evidence documented, exonerate the president and his campaign from collusion, which is a pretty impactful finding. And so both of these posters are simpler in form. The one on the left is a printed piece that I printed over and over and over again with this text, with redactions, and then documented it being stepped on multiple times and then scanned back in for its final iteration. And then the opposite process, I took the opposite process for the one on the right, where I zoomed in on the text. I was meditating on the dissemination of this report with the one on the right. It's a printed report, but it is accessed digitally. Again, that 800 million people downloaded the report from online. And so in its original iteration, it has since been updated, but in its original iteration, it was what we call a dumb PDF, where it couldn't be searched. It couldn't, none of the text was live. It was literally scans of printed documents put into a digital format. And so the clumsiness of that design prompted me to zoom in on the letter forms as an exploration of printed matter. So the one on the left here, again, both of these designs, and this is the last pair that I'll show you here tonight, looks at a quote from the report that says, our investigation found multiple acts by the president that were capable of exerting undue influence over law enforcement investigations, including the Russian interference and obstruction investigations. And so what I created here on the left references the decorative drop caps from really early printed material, but hidden within that decorative illustration and design are actually tiny cherubs tweeting, and through those tweets, the body text below describes the way that through, for example, firing Comey and asking his aides to destroy documents, there was evidence of collusion, but because the documents were destroyed or the aides refused to participate in the collusion, they couldn't move forward with some of this investigation, and hence all of the blacked out content harm to ongoing matter. So the campaign, this project is ultimately a call to action. So far, the project has curated designs from prominent graphic designers, illustrators, and artists across the globe. It's an international project at this point. So far, there's 37 posters in the exhibit so far. I just gave you a taste of some of my contributions. The project features work by myself and Anne Berry, of course, but also Jen Ken Bisaki-O'Grady, Sarah Rutherford, Jessica Barnes, Raf Barahona, Marie Bourgeois, Mikey Burton, Brian Edelson, Jordan Kaufman, Andre Munix, and Kelly Walters. And we're actually still in the curation process, and we get contributions to the project. We're still receiving contributions to the project. The collection has traveled to several venues, which has given us an opportunity to reimagine how it might be displayed. Again, public access to this content is of prime importance to the project. So this was at the Crassell Art Center up in St. Joe, Michigan. It's also showed at the Grunwald Gallery of Art at Indiana University, Cleveland State Galleries. It opens at Cleveland State next week, actually, and will return in February to the new Cook Center at Maxwell Hall here at IU. I want to take a second and thank some of the funders. The project received funding from the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences at CSU, the Ohio Arts Council, Indiana University's Arts and Humanities Council, New Frontiers in the Arts and Humanities Program, Indiana University Bloomington Grant Aid Program, and an anonymous donor and contributions from CSU faculty, staff, and community supporters. So thank you so much for all of that support. Ultimately, the goal of this project is to increase kind of civic duty and civic engagement with public documents through the power of graphic advocacy and graphic design. I think I'm gonna wrap up here with this installation shot of the street-facing gallery display window at the galleries at CSU, where, as I mentioned, the show is opening next week. What has been compelling and interesting about this exhibit and this project is how it is in direct dialogue with other conversations that are happening nationally and in various communities. So this gallery, the street-facing window that this work looks out onto was spared during recent protests, but buildings on either side of it received a fair amount of vandalism. And so I'm actually really proud of that dialogue, of the way that this exhibit seeks to continue that kind of perverse Unheimlich, which I talked about at the beginning, propelling communities to ask different, probing, and uncomfortable questions and see itself from outside of the house. There are more events beyond what I mentioned upcoming, both in person and virtual. So if you're interested in being involved or contributing, please reach out and also go vote.
Sarah, that was terrific. Thank you so much for your thoughts and for your efforts. We have got a couple of questions a couple of questions so far. So we invite listeners to please leave questions, and I will convey them to Sarah. The first question is from Peg Feynman, and she's asking, have you considered a post-election follow-up project to Ongoing Matter?
A post-collection follow-up?
Post-election.
Post-collection.
Post-election.
Oh, post-election. Yes, at this point, we have a couple exhibitions upcoming, but we are probably not unlike many citizens kind of holding our breath. We're kind of taking a short pause right now to see what's going to happen. I think that ultimately the design problem that we articulated of misinformation and disinformation is not going away. I briefly referenced Facebook's UX UI in this talk. I briefly kind of overviewed and outlined the abominable design of government documents. I mean, if you look at other countries' government documents, they're not all this bad. We can do better. So I think that there's an avenue there where this work can continue that's not just focused on the Mueller report. My colleague, my former colleague and collaborator, Anne, and one of our global collaborators in New Zealand are trying to gather data right now that tracks some of this impact of disinformation and misinformation from the Mueller report, but are interested in documenting those strategies so that they can be used in other similar situations. So government reports that are impenetrable or other kinds of important documents that are really suffering in terms of graphic design. And then I think just for our own sanity, we're putting together, we're kind of collecting everything that we've learned and talked about in this project into some kind of publication as a rumination, but also as, again, as a path that somebody else, other designers or other folks interested in advocacy could follow as a case study. I hope that answered the question.
That's great. And I as somebody who's also dealt with Freedom of Information Act requests, that even though these texts are 50, 60 years old, they are still fully redacted. And these are the declassified ones of that. So I appreciate that. I appreciated the poster that spoke to where you had the redact, read act. And I think that too is extremely timely.
Yeah.
Speaking to your point about the poor design of government documents in general, and the Mueller report in particular, Marissa Moorman says, A, fascinating, and B, do you think that the problem of design of the Mueller report was in fact by design?
I do. I mean, I think I don't know that it was by design in the most conscious way, but I think that you can look at design of a lot of laws and documents that govern, and they restrict legibility and understanding from classes of citizens that are impacted by them. And this is a really good example of that. And so again, it's part of what was the goal of this project is to not just rely on news reporting, to not just rely on podcasts or other books, but to try to encourage a kind of primary source investigation by using the tools of graphic design that have served designers and artists for hundreds and hundreds of years so well to promote certain kinds of messaging. And so again, it's why I bring up the Warhol piece, because a lot of people know Warhol for very different work, and they don't know that he participated in political poster design and advocacy for the Democratic, presidential election campaign. So, I mean, that's kind of a more meta or broader question. I think there's also a way that big institutions don't move quickly with change. And I'll just say that.
Well said, diplomatic. Maggie Nye Smith asks, given the importance of public access to the thesis of the project, have you considered a way to digitize or make the show virtually interactive and accessible, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic?
It's a great question. Absolutely. In fact, it was part of our initial design phase, and we actually have a version of what we are going for is live already on that website that I showed. There is a second design phase that's almost complete and will be live by the November 4th, next week's launch opening at Cleveland State Galleries. And that second phase of design interactivity on the website actually pulls out some of the pieces of the report. It links to some of the poster design and encourages that kind of like curiosity to dig down into the report yourself. So we have taken pieces of the report and redesigned their context. We keep, again, we're honoring the original text. That's always been very important, that the words themselves aren't changed, because there's a way that we want, at its heart, this project is apolitical, right? It's about truth and about the democratic process in terms of you know, having your voice be heard and being able to access information so that you're making an informed decision. So to get back to the question though, yeah, the website right now has our phase 1 version. Phase 2 will launch next week. And then we have some AR and projection plans for the February show when it comes back to the new Cook Center in Maxwell Hall.
That's great. And how long will it be up in the Cook Center?
I believe it comes down in late March. So it's a shorter run, because it has already been, it had a pop-up at the Grunwald Gallery here at Indiana University. And major shout out to Betsy and Linda and the whole crew at Grunwald. I mean, they were kind of the start. You know, we tested it and they were open-minded enough to be like, yeah, we'll let you throw some stuff up on the wall. So thank you so much to that crew.
Great. So Arthur Liu asks, regarding the quote, design is about how it relates to people, where does it come from? Could you elaborate on it through aspects such as design's function, efficacy, and fundamental value?
Okay, can you repeat the second part of that question one more time?
Could you elaborate on the quote, I believe, of design is about how it relates to people? Could you elaborate on it through aspects such as design's function, efficacy, and fundamental value?
Yeah, so it's a Victor Papanek quote, and the idea, it's actually in context of UX UI design, if I'm remembering correctly, but really design is a tool for connection, and so if graphic design or design in general is not actually serving the fundamental purpose of its goals, then it's doing its constituencies a disservice. So in the context of ongoing matter, and I think I kind of mentioned this or touch on this, civic engagement was one of the big goals. The Mueller Report, while it's incredibly impactful, fails as a design artifact, as a document that is supposed to function, right? It's legible in a very limited sense of the word legible. It's not accessible to a lot of people. The language of it is not accessible. The squirreling away of some of its most important information into footnotes makes it inaccessible. It's kind of this, also the length of it, I very briefly mentioned, 448 pages to get through this content. And then of course, all of the redactions. So I think that with regards to the efficacy of design, it requires kind of self-evaluation, because there's ways that design can serve commerce it can serve marketing purposes that are, it can be flashy, it can get your attention, but what is it actually directing you to do? Again, I kind of go back to Facebook, for example, in that Facebook functions for a very particular kind of experience. And that experience is usually echo chambers of ideas. It is also designed to track, which doesn't serve the people that are using it. It serves, right, like big data corporations and the people that own that data, and can be highly manipulative. Trying to remember the final part of the question and if I answered it.
And value, function, efficacy, and value.
That's a great question. It's a big question. I'm looking forward to talking to more Arthur about it.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of the project? How you moved from reading the report to developing this collaboratively led and international project?
Yeah, so it started with my colleague Anne, or former colleague Anne, sending an email saying, like, I have a crazy idea. Like, here's this, and she's a political junkie, has always kind of had her finger on the pulse of politics. And the conversation, I mean, many emails, voice calls, kind of design nerd conversations later, we decided to go for this project with these particular goals in mind, using the Mueller Report as a case study, and asking, kind of leveraging our network of other artists and designers. Again, maybe kind of circling back to Arthur's question about efficacy, is like the people who have the power to focus someone's eye and get someone's attention, that is an intense responsibility and power. And so we started thinking about, designers that we know who are incredible creators, but also would want to support this kind of project as well. So from there, we've gone through a variety of iterations. So like I said, we had a pop-up show. We've given talks and conferences internationally to get an internet, like the United States is, I mean, particularly right now, we're very myopic. We're like all about us. But again, we wanted to kind of expand this conversation with regards to design and get insight into how other countries, what other countries do with regards to their government documents, as well as, again, keeping our ear open to insights that other graphic designers might have. Design is a very collaborative space. And so part of this project is, it's born from that was definitely its origin story, and we want to keep it open.
So you said that you're still expecting a number of posters. What, how many are you still looking at? And are you, I think this probably could feed into the, are you planning a follow-up, but what is the trajectory after, say, I mean, obviously everything's on pause, right? For a little bit, but what are you thinking? You've planned through February through March with this, and you're getting new designs in. And how do you anticipate taking the project after March, insofar as you can?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what happens on November 4th, and also, or November 3rd. And it also, we have a research initiative right now that we were polling kind of, like I said, we were doing some international conferences where we were gathering data about how others might interact with this project. And we've only started to synthesize that data, and I could see that being a path forward. But with regards to accepting posters and accepting contributions, we're very open. Like again, the goal is to get people civically engaged. And so it's also not, I don't think there's a restriction here anymore for just traditional graphic designers. Some of the most compelling design work that I've seen that is of a political nature is, you know, Sharpie marker on cardboard held up on the street. But the message of that design is incredibly impactful. And so it's, we don't have any concrete plans after March is the short answer, but it's open for sure. And I would encourage anybody that's interested, there is a lot more information on our website, and there's access points to get involved, to contact us, to vote.
So I'm going to just put very briefly the website. You had the slide up, but it was ongoing/matter.org.
Mm-hmm. It's a hyphen, ongoing dash.
I put it in the chat, but it's, well, so just as a repeat for those of you who are watching on Facebook, ongoing-matter.org. Do you have anything that you would like to say to wrap up with?
Just to, you know, if you haven't already, engage yourself in that democratic process, and don't just vote on November 3rd, but also, you know, educate yourself on who is holding the power in our political lives. And I hope that people see this also, like I said, as a case study, that these kinds of conversations can be engaged with by kind of anybody. And again, we want this to be a case study that has a life, not necessarily within the Mueller Report, you know, 5 or 10 years from now, but that still impacts how we think about misinformation, disinformation, the design of government documents, and the access to the democratic process.
I think that really speaks very nicely to your view of yourself as a scholar, practitioner, researcher, and storyteller. And you're telling a story where the story is being obfuscated. So thank you very much for this fascinating talk, and for the project, and for walking us through it. And we look forward to seeing more. So.
Thank you so much, Debbie.